So I'll go over that issue later. All right?
Thank you.
But I'm recording now. So let's talk about the exam, right? You have 50 questions, 40 multiple choice, 10 true false. The breakdown of the exam is already available. You can go into, it's been posted for a while. You can go into the modules. Right, exam 2 information. Where's our student view? There we go. Modules. You got exam 2 information right here. Exam 2 instructions and breakdown. It's the same instructions as the last exam. Our exam is tomorrow from 5 to 7 p.m. in 102, right? Yes. RBA 102. So it's not our normal room. I couldn't get the normal room. It was reserved. I think there's AIS in there. So 102. We have the room for 5 to 7 p.m., but honestly, I don't really predict anyone going over an hour. I'll stay 2 hours. But again, it's only 50 questions, 40 multiple choice, 10 true false. So we're talking about a similar length of the exam in terms of the first part as the last exam. Okay? So here's the breakdown. It's just 3 modules. There's 15 multiple choice questions for module 5 and 6, and then module 7 has 10 true false and 10 multiple choice. Okay? You've also got your memo due tomorrow as well. I would say this level of exam is, the material is a little bit more challenging than the last exam because chapters 4 and 5 in the textbook are a little tricky. Not tricky, but there's a lot of stuff going on. And it's some of the more difficult stuff in tax research. But I would say, bless you, the questions are pretty straightforward. Okay? If you focus on what we talk about in class, as well as with respect to what homework I suggested to do in the back of the chapter, there's no tricks. No tricks. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at Module 5 first, which is Chapter 4, Administrative Authority. So textbook readings, of course, Module 5 deals with Chapter 4. Very important chapter because it goes through administrative authority. Supplemental readings. So we had this PowerPoint here. Does it actually let me write on this? Boom, it does. I just need to get the full screen going. Come on. Does it let me scroll? I'm nervous that's going to like open something in a different app. Hey, minimize. Oh, I know. I got to go back to that. I was scrolling earlier. What happened?
2-finger scroll.
That's the Zoom, isn't it? It might be. You might be right. Still getting used to this technology.
Does it go side to side? Or 3-finger. What are you trying to do? See that white arrow there?
Just trying to go down. This one?
Tap with 3 fingers. See where,
I'm trying with 3 fingers.
does the arrow work?
Yeah, I need to lock it in place. Lock this. Lock. Let's try to go back and see what happens. There we go. I think I must have accidentally pressed something. All right, supplemental readings. So go through these slides. There we go. Right? We went through the different types of administrative sources. We talked about the IRS and the Treasury and what their functions are. Right? We talked about those things. There, now it's not as slanted anymore for you. Oh, come on. It won't stay. It just worked. I'm still getting used to it.
Is it that blue button in the top right corner?
Yeah, that's us, and you see that camera?
No, this one?
It's like blinking. Oh, then, there you go.
I don't know why it's doing. Oh, yeah. I see what you got to do. You got to select the area. But it's still blinking. I don't know why. It wants to record my, I don't know. So, talk about the role of the IRS and the Treasury. Regulations. We went through regulations, proposed, temporary, final regulations, all the different rules about regulations, and you need to know about those. The 3 categories of regulations. Chevron, right? Chevron deference, effective date of regulations, citing regulations. So citing is a big element of the exam, especially when you're talking about citing administrative sources and talking about citing cases. Good way to practice that is to go through the homework, which all the solutions are posted for the homework. Remember that I focus my attention on the discussion questions unless it's chapter 4. In chapter 4, there's some questions that went past the discussion questions. I think it was 1 through 50 I told you to do. So interpreting a regulation citation, locating and using regulations, classifying a regulation. So I gave an example there with the procedural regs. How does regulation become law? Temporary regs are the rules, right? The 3-year rule after 1998. Used to be just the case that, it was temporary until it was pretty much removed. But in 1998, if it's not finalized within 3 years, it's gone. There was a few students asking me some really in-depth questions about the regulations in the IRB versus CB and all that stuff. I think those are excellent questions, especially for practice. But again, you're not going to have many questions on the exam that go that in depth. There might be a few of them that are a little bit more in depth, but these questions are more basic level. I know you all got a lot of other stuff going on, especially after hearing what y'all got going on in corporate tax. So revenue rulings are the next one. Revenue rulings, primary, right? How to cite them. Again, you can get some practice in the homework. Revenue rulings is authority, right? If you ever have a question about where an authority in this class fits in terms of its weight, I created that document, remember back in Module 2, that puts all of the authorities in the class in a ranking order, 1 through 10. So go back to that. It might not be in this module, but if you're hey, how does a revenue ruling stack up to a RevProc? Go back to that Module 2. All right? I'm not going to pull that up here, but that was created for the entire course. So don't think just because that was there, it's only relevant for Module 2. Again, all this stuff builds in this class. Yes, Module 5, 6, and 7 are on this exam. However, there is some stuff at the beginning of the semester that might help you, like that introduction to tax research, especially that table. So here was an example with the medical rev ruling. And by the way, if I'm going across a topic you have a question on, please stop me and ask the question. Rev proc, so rev rulings, rev procs are similar in terms of the level. However, rev procedure is a lot not as common. It doesn't deal with a fact pattern. It's more a procedural aspect, like it says. Rev procedure. The how-to rules. Citation. Some examples of the types of things. Letter ruling, so private letter rulings, right? Specific to the fact pattern that the taxpayer is asking about. So they're specific to that, that actual case that the taxpayer is requesting a private letter ruling. Okay, those are the only ones binding on. The technical advice memorandum, determination letters. So once you get past revenue rulings or rev procs, all the other IRS documents are no longer binding, they're only persuasive. Got regulations, rev rulings, rev procs, those are all binding on taxpayers. Private letter rulings, technical advice memorandum, determination letters, etc., those are considered persuasive at best. 6 through 10 on our list. Another useful chart that might be helpful is, again, back in Module 2, the list of the different authorities. It gives you a summary of what each of these are, because you might have some questions that are dealing with, I give you a definition, I'm like, okay, this defines private letter ruling. Technical advice memoranda, determination letter, which are also here in the slides as well. But if you like to have it in one big table format, you have it there. Precedential value is talked about for private letter rulings. Citing letter rulings. So again, more citations. Again, practice in the homework. There's not going to be too many questions of the 50 that deal with citation. I would say at the maximum 5, maybe 6. Deal with citing sources, okay? Administrative or judicial. But still, if you want to get 50 out of 50, you got to know how to cite these different things. Okay? And the case one is a little bit more tricky because there's a lot of different reporters. So private letter ruling, continued, how to make a request. There's an example of private letter ruling. Acquiescences and non-acquiescences. So remember, acquiescence and non-acquiescence just means if the IRS acquiesces, that means that they agree with the holding of the decision and they're no longer going to pursue that at a national level. Non-acquiescence, the IRS is going to continue to fight the way it thinks the law should be treated. Because remember, the tax court might hold in a certain jurisdiction that's the case, but they're going to continue in other jurisdictions. Chief Counsel memoranda. Announcements and notices. IRS publications, right? Important to note that cannot be relied upon. There we go. Technical advice memoranda. Field service advices. Again, most of these are definitional things on the exam, if they're on the exam. Determination letters, announcements, notices, general counsel memoranda, action on decision, that's the acquiescence, non-acquiescence, internal revenue manual, audit-related releases. That's an example. And then here, the rest of the slides are me pulling the table I mentioned earlier from Module 2 onto this slide to go through the weight of the regulations, the rev rulings, the rev proc, private letter ruling, technical advice memoranda, field service advice, determination letter, announcement and notice, general counsel memoranda, technical advice memorandum, action on decision, that's the acquiesce and non-acquiesce, internal revenue manual, information letter, Technical information release. So any questions from the presentation materials of Module 5, Chapter 4? So again, it's important that you go through the discussion questions at the end of the chapter. We went through a lot of them. I posted the solutions because I want you to be able to work through them in case you're not having trouble understanding. Some of the ones we didn't do in class, I told you that you need to do just for sake of time, are the citation ones. How to properly cite. Okay? How to properly cite. So this question problems for Module 5, questions 1 through 50, because usually it's discussion questions, but going into the early part of the next part, there's some citation questions. That's why I assigned those. Exam practice questions. These are going to give you a good idea of the style of questions you might have on the exam, so definitely look at that. Again, remember that this module is all multiple choice. There won't be too many. Well, actually, never mind. Take it back. There's 15 questions. That's what I'm going to tell you from this module. I was going to say there won't be too many from this module. There's 15 questions from this module. Any questions from Module 5? Another thing to note is, on the exam, if you see lots of none of the above questions, I almost never pick that as an answer. So don't go. It might be true. It might be. You got to check it. But if you have that, don't fall for that every time.
Now that you say that, it makes me believe there's an answer that's none of the above.
Yeah, there might be one or a few.
You shouldn't say.
A few is more than one, right? A few could be one. Yeah. What I'm saying is that if there's none of the above, more likely, I probably would not go with none of the above. There might be a few of them that you're like, yeah, I definitely know the answer is none of the above because the answer is not on here. But if you're between none of the above and an answer, I'll go with the answer. That's what I'm saying. If you're unsure.
You're going to throw it in like the cases?
No. I'm not going to do none of the above with the cases. But these ones. These ones will have none of the above. Same with the next chapter, but not Module 7. I will not do none of the above with Module 7. Yeah, because that's not fair, because there's 50 different. There's so many different options, right? Again, best bet, probably don't go none of the above unless you definitely know it's not none of the above. Okay, Module 6 is Chapter 5. So we know textbook reading is Chapter 5. Supplemental readings. Judicial sources of tax law. You got the learning objectives. Okay, so need to know about the court structure and the court system. Of course, that's very important. You need to know the trial court levels, the appeals court levels, and of course the U.S. Supreme Court. You need to know differences. There's a chart at the end of this that talks about the differences in the different courts. The trial courts mainly is what we're talking about. But you also need to know about the other courts as well, like whether they have juries or not, right? The only court that has a jury is the district court, potentially. Not always. All the other courts have no jury possible. Okay? So the federal court system, IRS, taxpayer disagree. Your options are either pay the assessment or not pay the assessment in case the IRS can either take you to court or you can take the IRS to court in the tax court. But remember, you have to pay to play in the district court and the court of federal claims. IRS may use the court system to do some stuff. Federal court cases, federal court level, I should say. So there's the third branch of the government, judicial. Questions of law versus fact. Right, we've talked about that already, how the trial court level is where the questions of fact are addressed, but they could also be questions of law at the trial court level as well. But when you start getting to the appeals in the Supreme Court, there's no more questions of fact. That's for the low level to decide, and on appeals, that's not what they're there to determine. They're there to determine, did the lower court err in making a decision for certain reasons. Stare decisis, of course, deals with precedent. Right? Why is it important doctrine? It keeps our system a more predictable system. So here are the different courts. How many different geographic circuit court of appeals are there?
13.
Geographic.
Oh.
11, right? And there's the one in D.C. for federal courts.
Yeah.
Everyone got that? 11 geographic circuits. There's one in D.C. that's just for all D.C. matters, all federal matters in D.C. And then we have, those are the 13. And then, of course, we have the U.S. Supreme Court above that. So here is a breakdown of the court system. Here's flow chart. There's really four, according to the textbook, there's really four different trial courts because they break up the tax court into the regular and the small. Oh. Can you imagine some of these older accounting professors dealing with this? I would never be straight. It really. They won't even know they have I have an Apple TV. Oh, I didn't know I could plug it in, right? I'm just picturing my old tax professor in undergrad. He probably doesn't even use a projector. He probably uses overhead still. Gotta go to Target copy and pick up the book. All right, burden of proof. So remember, the burden of proof generally is on the taxpayer. However, it does shift in some cases. Remember, we even talked about the hobby issue, section 183, and how that's an example of where it shifts to the IRS to show. Even mentions it right there. I'm not going to test you on, hey, what are some specific areas of the law where it shifts? No, I'm not going to do that. But know that generally, the burden of proof is on the taxpayer to prove that whatever they're trying to, it's called the burden of persuasion and burden of production. So producing evidence and also persuading the court whatever you're trying to argue, right? Trade or business. Material participant, section 469. Capital gain, whatever it is. I don't have income. You can skip that cases involving partnership. I'm not going to test you. Okay, common legal terminology. I would just know a few of these, maybe the major ones that we talked about, like the writ of certiorari, appellant. Oops, did bona fide, sorry. I don't want that. Who else? Defendant. It did? It won't let me do blue now. It was working earlier. Now it's not letting me. Oh, because this needs to be on. There. Yeah, it's just this one. Appellant. Defendant. So you got to learn all this. It's like a process. What else? Dicta, that's a big one. So that's when the court, not in deciding language, mentions something that might be important in the future or different, but not for this case. En banc, when the whole court, right, full court hears instead of just a single judge or selected judges. What else? Parole evidence. Petitioner or plaintiff. It's a good one to know. Pro se, to represent oneself. Respondent. That's really everything from that list. I would say it's important. Okay, so you need to know about the U.S. Tax Court, and I go through all of them, and I talk about all of them in the slides here. You can read those, right? The number of judges, types of decisions. The Golson rule, of course, is critical. Small claims, that should be $50,000, right? It's $50,000 right now. Can we write it out? $50,000. Appeals go to the Circuit Court of Appeals, depending on where you're located. What are some advantages to a taxpayer choosing to initiate a tax court? The main one is you don't have to pay to play. Also, there's tax matter experts as judges. Here's the different locations. I'm not going to ask you like, oh yeah, true or false. Or there's no true and false in this chapter, but which of these is not a location? I'm not going to do that. Locating and citing tax authorities. So again, this is important. So the real focus, as long as you understand the general format of how to cite a case, that stays pretty consistent. But the key when you're looking at citations is the reporters. What can be in a certain reporter, right? For example, the reporter U.S., which is the official GPO for Supreme Court, is a Supreme Court reporter. Right? TC is the official tax court reporter. TC memos, of course, another citation. District courts, the only ones that you can have a jury. That's the main benefit there. There's other benefits. You might have favorable precedent in your jurisdiction. Yes?
What about for like RIA and CCH and West and everything? Do we have to know the differences?
Yeah, you do. There's a list in your thing, but in your textbook or on the slides. But honestly, I focus more on the main reporters, like the Federal Supplement, the U.S., the more official ones. The more ones you're more commonly going to see. But with the CCH and RIA, usually those reporters are usually AFTR and USTC. So you just need to know, hey, what types of cases can be in those reporters, right? You need to know that USTC or AFTR can include many different courts, right? You can have U.S. Supreme Court cases in that because that is RIA's tax series of reporters for the AFTR or the USTC for CCH. So you do need to have that. You need to understand that. So district court, the elements of that, again, a jury's allowed. That's one thing. Citing, court reporters. So here's West, Thomson Reuters. Again, there's that AFTR or USTC for CCH. By the way, we're only focusing in this class on tax cases. So yeah, AFTR and USTC are only going to have tax cases in them, but RIA and CCH might have other reporters that they make that are non-tax. So we're only focusing on the tax in this case. So if it's a case that asks you a question, what's the reporter? Again, we're assuming it's a tax case. U.S. Court of Federal Claims in D.C. Different things there. No jury trial. Talks about the reporters. U.S. Court of Appeals goes through that. No jury trial, right? Appellate court. Precedential weight, depending on where you're located. Locating and citing Court of Appeals decisions. Geographic areas. I'm not going to test you on the geographic areas. Again, that would be a little less difficult than the tax court one, but still I'm not going to be like, which circuit is Indiana located? Right? I'm not going to do that. Supreme Court, of course, the highest court in the land. You do need to know things like how many judges it's going to take to get a writ of certiorari granted to hear before the judges, which is 4, right? You need 4 more. You do need to know things like that. Jury trial not available. They usually don't really hear tax cases. 8 justices with 1 chief justice, so there's really 9. Right? Writ of certiorari is granted if 4 justices must vote to hear the case. Here's the Supreme Court reporters. Locating and citing judicial authority. Here's the unofficial ones. So CCH is a TCM, RIA is a TC memo. Remember, TC memos don't ever get published by official reporters, so they go right to RIA, CCH as their unofficial reporters. So that's an example where you would only look at what RIA and CCH do. Bless you. Here's the technical official format for court. So as I mentioned, as long as you know this format, right, the volume number, reporter, page number, court, year, you're pretty much good. You just need to know the differences with the reporters, what they mean, and where, you're not going to have a Supreme Court case in the federal supplement, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about, those types of things. Citators, so honestly, there's not really, the only thing you might need to know about citators is what they are, right? They're used to determine how current the law is, as well as there's something that's been, you can also use a citator to help guide you to something, because citators will reference other cases that have referred to your case. Assessing the authoritative value of decision. I don't think I really have any questions on this, but of course it's important for practice, whether that's an essential element or not. And then here's that table I was telling you about. It's very helpful. I guarantee you're going to at least have at least 1, maybe 2 questions. I guarantee at least 1 question asking you something about the trial courts, right? Which of these does not have a jury decision? Which of these has generalist judges? Those kinds of things. So it's probably going to be an easy question, but still I'm telling you, you're probably going to have a question like that. So any questions from Module 6? The discussion problems are just the discussion questions from the chapter, post the solutions. Again, there's a lot of questions that we didn't go over in class from that deal with citation. I highly recommend to look at that. I mentioned to look at those, but we did not get the time to go through those in classes for time's sake, but please look at those. Even if you're just looking at the question and looking at the solution, not even trying to attempt it, just to get an idea, because again, it's multiple choice exam. Any questions for Module 6? There's some practice questions in that module. I think for each module I do 40 practice questions, right? It's pretty generous. Okay? If you do have any questions on any of those while you're practicing in between now and the exam, please post on the discussion board. I'll be happy to address. There might be 1 or 2 where you have a question, and I'm happy to help. All right, so Module 7, which is what we've been focusing on for this exam. I'm sorry, we've been focusing on the last couple of classes, last few classes. So there's only 2 things you got to look at: the supplemental readings and the exam practice problems. So as I said again, I will reiterate this. You really only need to study the top 50 tax cases. That document. Okay? There won't be any none of the aboves on that, but there will be true false. So I might put a question in there. It's a true false question that's like, true or false? The Aerosmith case dealt with this general holding or something. So that could be something where you do need to know the 50 cases. Now, I will tell you that in class there were some cases where I told you, like, I kind of like rushed through it. Those cases, especially the ones that were like, oh, this involves multiple issues, I'm less likely to test you on those, but you still might see some of them. Maybe 1 or 2 questions involving those. But I would say of the 50 questions, there's maybe like 35 to 40 that I felt like were extremely relevant. Maybe there's like 10 that are critical in tax, and you're going to see them, but I didn't really stress them too much. Like, what's one that we didn't really spend too much time on? That's in my opinion. Better Business Bureau, just trying to think from alphabetically. That just sets that, hey, tax-exempt organizations can't be overly commercial, right? So you're wondering, well, why exactly did we do the 1 through 5 for the cases? You can't leave a tax research class without having been exposed to tax cases. Some professors make you brief cases. I think that's kind of way too old school and way too, like, you can go online now on websites and they brief them for you. I mean, yeah, you might disagree sometimes, but usually, the commercial resources are pretty good. They have like people, multiple teams checking them. Okay? You might find an error here and there. Maybe, out of 1,000 times, you might find one that's what you say was wrong. So I'm not going to make you brief cases. But I at least wanted to expose you to 5 cases. And again, I told you that if you're going to read anything about the opinions, which again, I'm not going to put them on the exam, but if you do want to read them for purposes of better benefiting you in practice, only focus on the Supreme Court opinion, which they're all really small. So for example, here's Glenshaw Glass. It's only 6 pages. And honestly, the opinion doesn't even start until the bottom of page 2, where it says, Mr. Chief Justice Warren delivered the opinion of the court. Okay? Because you can't have a tax research class without looking at a case. So I put those in there. I did the PowerPoint slides. Again, I used them from my previous, a tax professor that I actually had, and one of my friends, because he does a great job summarizing them, going through the facts of the cases and the critical elements of the case and explaining the case. Because in law school, that's what we do. We go through, hundreds, 200, 300 cases during the semester, and we basically go through each case. And we kind of do what we're doing with the 5 cases. Okay? So today we went through Glenshaw Glass, Aerosmith, and Lucas v. Earl. I'll post my recordings, but again, they might be a little choppy. You might be like, what is he trying to say when it transitions? I'm still learning the technology. But you'll still get it. You'll still get the general gist of what I'm talking about, so it'll still be fine. But again, really what you want to study is the top 50 tax cases, and I'll post tonight YouTube video for the top 50 tax cases. You can go through them. Before you go, as I mentioned, let me do this. Leave student view. The last thing I want to do, modules. Oh, wait, it's right there. Sorry, my apologies. If I go back, we'll go back to that. Oh, it did. No. Edit. Hey, it says someone already took the quiz. Cool. So what I did was I put 10 practice questions in here, and these are the types of questions you're going to have. Now, again, you have 50 cases to worry about. Again, as I mentioned earlier, 35 to 40 of them were more, we went in more depth, maybe 10 to 15. I kind of just breezed through, told you the general gist because, again, there are things you're probably going to see in practice. but I just don't really think they're as important for this class, understanding tax research. So the first one, true, false. The Crane decision deals with the treatment of certain liabilities when certain events occur. So what kind of question is this? It's just asking you what exactly happened in the case of central holding. That's a true statement. It does deal with liabilities, right? So that's a type of question that you might have. I could give you a true, false question, true, false about the central holding of the case. So you kind of need to know the central idea of the cases. Or, I'm sorry, no, you need to. Number 2, the Tufts and Higgins decisions are related, and Tufts even references Higgins many times in the case. So if I ever mention that a case references another one, in those little paragraph blocks I give you, it will have like, hey, these cases were referenced. That's the only way I could test you on that. Because again, we didn't look at the actual opinions. So that is a false statement. The answer is Tufts and Crane are related, and Tufts even reference Crane many times. Because as I said today in class, which is on the video, and that video, by the way, is intact perfectly, so that will be reported on YouTube, bless you, that Crane came first a lot earlier, and then remember it left open the door for what about non-recourse liabilities? Then Tufts came, same issue, but a non-recourse liability, and it actually references, hey, in Crane, this footnote 37 that everyone always talks about, this is what this is. So it actually uses that. So that's supposed to be an example where a related or not related case. How about this one? So that's the second type of true and false question you might see. These are types of questions. So when you're studying the top 50 questions, think about these issues. That's what you should be thinking about, are these kinds of issues. Right? What's the central holding? What kind of cases are related, if any? So if it references issues, then that's something, or references other cases, that's important. Or if I reference them on the video or your notes. Third, Helvering versus Horst and Lucas v. Earl both deal with the same questions of the 5 general income tax questions. So of course I can ask you about the 5 general income tax questions, right? And that's easier because this one's a little bit more straightforward if you took notes, or if you didn't, you can go back on the videos, because each of the questions, remember, each of the cases I put what question involves. Now with that, some of the cases I told you involve multiple questions. I'm not going to really do this type of question with those. But a lot of them were like when, there were some who cases, there was some income deduction, right? There were some character questions. So that's what that's dealing with. That's true. They both deal with the who question, right? Doesn't say which of the 5 questions, just says they both deal with the same. Commissioner versus Idaho Power deals with the issue of dominion and control and when determining gross income. So this one's tricky because it's Indianapolis Power and Light, right? Which is the issue of dominion and control when determining gross income. That's another issue. So this one is a central holding, but one thing is that I talk about this more in class than I did. It's within there, right? It's a gross income issue. Well, you should be able to get this correct because you know Commissioner versus Idaho Power deals with deductions, not income. So that right there should help you. But Commissioner versus Indianapolis Power and Light, you know, deals with gross income. And I mentioned how it's the dominion control issue because it deals with deposits. 5, Burnett versus Logan is a case that created the open transaction doctrine. This is true. This is the central holding. It's also a doctrine that comes with another thing I can test you on. And the same types of questions are also what you find in the multiple choice. Which of these cases is the central issue in holding involved this characterization question of the 5 general income tax questions? Glenshaw Glass is income. Gregory versus Helvering is deduction. Blair versus Commissioner is who? Corn products doctrine is character. So that's the type of question you might see. Which of the following is not a requirement for having gross income under the Glenshaw Glass decision? So I will ask questions about specific things, specific doctrines or specific principles from cases. You have to meet certain criteria. Administrative convenience is not a requirement. That's right. Which of these cases is the most relevant to Helvering versus Horst? If you have that, most related. I said most relevant. Most related. It's going to be Lucas v. Earl because all the other ones deal with non-who questions, so you want to group it by the type of question it involves. By the way, for that type of question, if there was a case where I said that there's 2 questions, you still want to consider the 2 questions. Like we talked about some of them that are both character and timing. We did one today. It was I can't remember it. There was one we did today where it dealt with when and the timing of. It was one of the last 10. No, 2.
Midland Ross.
Midland Ross, yes, thank you. So Midland Ross, remember, that's the one where it dealt with original issue discount. An original issue discount is a timing question, but it's also a character question because with character, if you sell your bonds later on, that would be, it's an investment to you, capital gain or capital loss. But if it's treated as interest, it's treated as ordinary. But it's also recording it early. So that's an example of one that you could use for either one. So you got to be careful with that. We're in the 210. I'll see you over there. All right. You probably heard me down the hall, right? This question is a little fact pattern. You might have a fact pattern where I say which of these cases is the most related to the issue. So I could even ask you about that. Okay? Here, she's retires. She receives from her company a retirement present. A foreign passes to Disney World for her and her family. Which of these cases would be most relevant? It'd be, is Kirby Lumber deals with discharge of indebtedness. We don't have that. USV James is illegal income. Not that. PG Lake is contract rights. Not that. So it's got to be the gift one, right? So with that one, you can either do process of elimination, or you just know, hey, it's a gift issue. Probably process of elimination, honestly, might work a little bit better because at least it narrows it down, right? And finally, the last one that we're done with today's, which of these cases most directly influenced Congress to create a code section? So what I'm saying is, there were some of the cases I told you that, hey, code sections were later created after this case. Not Glenshaw Glass, not Lucas v. Earl. Lucas v. Earl, it can't be a who question because who questions, there's almost never any code sections. Welch v. Helvering, it's not that, it's Higgins. I told you Higgins case, before Higgins there was no investment income provisions. Then Higgins came out and that was ruled that investment was not deductible at that time. And then afterwards Congress came in and said, hey, we're going to allow investment expenses now in 1954. That's the type of question you might see as well. And we're done. Any questions? All right.